The U.S. response to the drone attack in Jordan that killed and wounded U.S. service members is likely to be more powerful than previous American retaliatory strikes in Iraq and Syria. Though the Pentagon and White House are being careful and playing it differently this time, the Biden camp has been repeating that U.S. does not want to go to war with Iran. And everyone knows that these militias are backed by Iran, these militias which have been attacking U.S. bases all across Syria and Iraq. Now, how will the U.S. really respond to the recent drone strike when it's a known secret that Iran has backed these militias attacking U.S. bases? Why is U.S. mentioning so categorically that it won't go to war with Iran? Well, to discuss matters further, I'm joined by Colonel David B. DeRoche, Professor at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University. Welcome to WION, sir. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Sir, John Kirby, of course, in the Pentagon mentioned yet again that we don't want another war. We don't wish to escalate. We don't want to go to war with Iran. Now, if just a few months ago, I remember when the militias backed by Iran were taking part in the Israel-Hamas war, that time Biden was very clear telling Iran, be careful. And now a statement comes out from the Biden camp saying, Iran, we don't want to go to war with you. Now, I just wanted to understand, after over 170 odd attacks on U.S. forces by Iranian proxies, why is U.S. making such a categoric statement that they don't want war with Iran? Who are they trying to appease, or is it a move to not telegraph their upcoming retaliation for the recent Jordan attack?
Yeah, good question. So one group is being appeased and one group is being sent a message of limited...
that's interesting. Yes, please tell more.
Okay. The group that's being appeased is in the United States. It's a big part of President Biden's base in the Democratic Party who are up to any foreign military activity. And, quite a number of whom, just want to see a complete U.S. withdrawal from the region, which is also the aims of Iran. So President Biden was elected with the promise of restoring normalcy, putting an end to the era of foreign wars. And as you saw, he ordered the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and has been unapologetic about that because he said, well, this is what we're doing. So he has to make those people, the people who agreed with him on the Afghan withdrawal and moves of that sort, he has to let them know that he is not the driver of conflict and instability. He does have to represent U.S. security interests overseas. The group that he sent a message that this is a limited escalation to is Iran, which does, as you noted, sponsor these and probably directs these forces at this point. What he's basically saying is, look, we're going to inflict a degree of damage upon you because that is what you get when you take American lives. And this is going to have to be somewhat heavy punishment because what he wants to do is reestablish deterrence. He wants to show that the ground rules are, if you take an American life, this will not be something that you can just wipe off. This is going to be something that is going to be very painful for you, so do not do it again. But at the same time, he has to let them know that this is not a prelude to a general invasion of Iran or to attacks on Iranian cities. Apparently, those are reserved for other Islamic states like Pakistan, which has recently conducted an airstrike in Iran. So it's a very, very difficult task President Biden has in front of him.
Colonel, I also wanted to just, get your thoughts on this. This is something I wanted to ask you earlier in the bulletin as well, but we have more time here, so I want to get into it. Are local Iran-backed Shia militias taking advantage of the fact that U.S. does not want to strain ties in West Asia, which are already being tested due to U.S. backing of Israel? Are they kind of taking advantage of the fact that U.S. has its hands, at least one hand tied behind its back, because Russia has been making good inroads in the West Asian region? We already saw the kind of response and the kind of reception he received in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And of course, with U.S. backing Israel, it's not going to be getting that kind of warmth from the West Asian region. Do you feel the militias know that U.S. has its hand tied behind its back? That's why they're going after all these bases. 170 attacks is not a joke. That also on the world's most powerful military.
Yeah, I'm glad we have more time to go into this. That's a very good, and it gets at the nub of the problem. So if you look at the Iranian way of warfare going back 30 years, they've realized that in a direct military confrontation between Iran, it goes back to the Iran-Iraq war. They do not want a direct military confrontation because they know they'll lose. the last time Iranian forces directly confronted U.S. military forces was in 1988, and the U.S. Navy destroyed the Iranian Navy in one day. So what they've done is move through proxies, and they know that they're dealing with a Western democracy and that doesn't want to get into a general war. And so what they do is they try to obscure the origins of these attacks, and they keep their reach limited. They keep it at a lower level. What they're trying to do is force a debate in the West where they'll say, well, we don't really know if this was Iran, so let's not strike against them. And generally, they've been allowed to operate within certain limits. So, for example, when the United States killed Qasem Soleimani, everybody focused on Qasem Soleimani. That was the United States reacting outside of the traditional limits of this, what we call gray zone confrontation. I've argued at the time what's more significant is the guy who was killed with Qasem Soleimani, his most devoted and loyal servant, a man named Abdulmadi al-Mohandes, who was an Iraqi, who was the deputy leader of the Popular Mobilization Unit, which is basically a militia that the Iraqi government has brought into and pays, but which serves the interests of Iran. In the past, the rules were if an Iranian agent was elected, say, to the Lebanese parliament as a Hezbollah member, we treated him as a Lebanese. He was off limits. But by killing Abdulmadi al-Mohandes, we kind of redefined the rules of this military interaction that's been going on for 2 decades. And I think that the killing of 3 American soldiers is beyond those established norms. I think the United States has to establish deterrence in a strong and powerful manner. But at the same time, they have to let Iran know that this is not the prelude to a general invasion, that they can, in fact, de-escalate, and that this is not a mechanical series of escalations that will inevitably lead to general war.
Yeah, I wanted to take a little further from here also. Just again, as you mentioned, what had happened earlier in the 80s, there was another incident which took place. I wanted to ask and take your thoughts on it. If you think that can serve as some kind of a precedent here, if you recall what happened in 1983 after the deadly Beirut barracks bombing, where 241 U.S. military personnel died and Ronald Reagan pulled back the Marines from there a few months later. Do you feel there is a possibility of that happening again? And with such precedents, what options does U.S. have today regarding the kind of attacks that their forces are facing at the moment?
Well, so the Marine barracks is the model that Iran hopes to follow. So what they see there is that they inflicted a very large blow on U.S. forces the United States left. And so that's basically the model they're trying to emulate as their strategy by setting up a number of proxies. The Persian Iranians have set up a number of Arab forces to do their dirty work for them. Most of the who fight and die on behalf of Iranian interests in the modern era are Arabs. So they will fight to the last Arab to get rid of Americans in the region. That is the model they hope to do. They were aided by the fact that the Marine deployment, which also had a significant number of Army forces in support, that lacked strategic guidance and strategic purpose. And my fear is that the U.S. presence in Syria today doesn't have an overall strategic purpose. We originally deployed there to counter Daesh, but now we're there to prevent a lot of bad things happening. That's not the same as having overall theory of strategic unity. And I've argued with other people in the U.S. government about this, so my view is not universally shared. So I think they focused on Syria because that's where they view both. We have small numbers, limited interests. The government of Syria, the genocidal government of Syria, does not want us there, obviously, because we're in them from total control. And they see it as a marginal U.S. deployment. And both the Trump administration and the Biden administration haven't really made the case to the U.S. public for why we're in Syria. So the average American would say, why are we in Syria? And if the Iranians are successful in inflicting significant casualties on us, then the question will be the same as in Beirut. Why are we there in the first place? And if you don't have a convincing argument for that, then hard in a democracy to maintain forces there.
I also wanted to come to something which has happened more recently. It's a development that we have been tracking since, a few hours, of course, but it's being reported that there was confusion over the enemy drone, and this is regarding the recent attack in Jordan, that there was a confusion regarding the enemy drone and a US drone that was also returning to the same base at the same time. Now, I'm just thinking around the current scenario. 170 attacks have already happened. It's all military bases, all outposts, they're already on high alert. And since a lot of these attacks have been carried out using drones, they will be wary of any kind of drone which is coming in. And I'm sure they have the know-how and the technology to differentiate between a friendly drone, a home drone, and a foe or an enemy drone. Now, I want to understand, US bases have already been attacked all these, so many times in these months. What could possibly have led to a failure like this, that they were unable to differentiate? I know the investigation is not complete yet, but this is the initial statement which has come out, and that in itself raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because this allows me to address a couple of things. So the first is, we have a lot of technology, but technology is not fail-safe, and at the end of the day, people operate these things. And if you have 170 attacks and one gets through, that's less than 0.5% failure, which is an engineer considers that a pretty efficient system. But of course, we're dealing with human lives here. But if you look at it in the totality, dispassionately, it's not surprising that at some some opportunity, defenses will fail, and you'll have a loss of life. And so the argument that President Biden's detractors have been making from the start is, why are we just playing defense? What we need to do is inflict serious damage on them to, make it unthinkable for them to try to attack us. But what happened here is a pretty common thing, where the reports are, and we don't know, I have to emphasize, first reports in war are always wrong. We don't know what happened, but it appears that with the U.S. drone returning to base, and that an Iranian-provided drone followed that drone, so that when the operators picked it up, they merged the two signals and thus didn't intercept the Iranian drone because they thought it was a U.S. drone. This is a pretty common phenomenon where one aircraft signal is mistaken for another. So a few years ago, the Syrians shot down a Russian command and control airplane. It was approaching Latakia, Syria, over the Mediterranean. A number of Israeli fighters came in behind it, which is a common technique. They get in close so that the air defense will pick up the Russian signal and not pick up the Israeli signal. And what happened was they picked up the Israeli signal. So when their air defense batteries were activated, the Israelis noticed that they dispersed. The Russian plane kept on going. The Syrians shot down the Russian, killed 22 Russians. The U.S. shooting down of the Iran Air jetliner in the 1980s was the same thing. The signal of the Iran Air jetliner was mistaken for the signal of an Iranian F-14 that was about to take off and was viewed as a threat. As the jet airliner flew over, it was engaged by the USS Vincennes and led to a great loss of civilian life. And of course, the Iranians shot down a civilian jetliner leaving Tehran International Airport, which you think would be easy to distinguish from an incoming target, but they mistakenly identified it as an incoming hostile threat and killed more people than died in the Iran Air accident. So from a weapons engineering standpoint, this is actually a pretty common phenomena. And we talk about the fog of war and friction. This is a good example of friction. And you have to expect something like this if you have almost, over 170 attacks.
All right, Colonel, we'll let you go for now. And thank you so much for joining and sharing all your insights. And I was sure to get the answers I wanted from you. So that's why we had you on for this discussion. Always a pleasure speaking with you. That was Colonel David B. DeRoche joining us right here on WION.
Thank you.